All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's Keith Stelman with the National Weather Service, Peachtree City. This is the special weather webinar for Saturday, March 15th, and that is for the severe weather we are expecting late tonight into tomorrow. Get moving here. Main points and highlights. Not a lot has changed on that front since yesterday. We are expecting a significant severe weather event / outbreak across the region into the area today. We're actually starting to see the beginnings of that take shape back in Mississippi with the line that's developing there. And all things are pointing to a pretty dangerous day across the Dixie through the day today into the evening tonight. For us here in Georgia, we should expect storms to begin as early as this evening across the Northwest. I'll get into some of the timing here in a bit, and we'll try to break it down a little bit. But the greatest risk for timing looks like that 8 p.m. Starting in the Northwest and then through 10 a.m. in the far Southeast. So that's the prime window across the entire spectrum of our area. But obviously there's windows of time for each of you in your individual localities. The primary threats have not changed. We're still looking at a pretty significant damaging wind threat, 60 to 80 miles per hour. And that could be a widespread risk. And I'll talk about that in a minute with some of the winds that we're looking at aloft. Tornadoes, long track, some of those, and many of those may be coming at us out of Alabama. So we'll see those things start to unfold through the day today. Could be strong, could be very long track tornadoes with supercells and even storms embedded within the squall line itself. The large hail risk seems to be greater further west, but it is not zero for us. There is an inch to maybe 2-inch hail risk for some of these cells as they're moving in. And then for the flood threat, it looks like it's going to be largely confined to North Georgia, although there could be some locally heavy rainfall with some of the storms, especially if we get more than one over an area. But largely North Georgia, the higher elevations. So let's talk about the risk itself. The day one risk is now out. The 11 or the 12:30 update just hit, and it did not change from the previous risk. And so what you're looking at on the screen now is the day one. The moderate risk still remains from about I-75 west, except south of I-20, where we see an enhanced risk from, say, Macon to about midway to Columbus. The biggest change from yesterday's day 2 outlook when they upgraded it yesterday is the far North Georgia. The moderate risk was expanded further east to include all the way to Gilmer and, say, Fannin County to your border. And that is because of the wind risk. And I'll show that when I break down the individual hazards in a minute. And then the only other change that doesn't affect us is the high risk back to our west was expanded northward, but it was not expanded eastward. Again, with the moderate risk, tornadoes, strong long track, damaging winds, covered that a minute ago. A lot of lightning expected with this, hail, and then the elevated flood risk, again, confined to far North Georgia. So let's talk about the timing a little bit before we get into the individual risks. The peak window, and this is the peak window where we expect the severe risk to peak for you in your locations. Showing with the graphic here. So the west, far northwest, maybe 1 to 2 counties in the northwest, 8 to about 3 a.m. That is your window, starting as early as 8. There could be some storms that move in as early as 6 p.m. We'll have to watch those. So, and I'm putting on here a plus or minus 1 to 2 hours for that, given that it's hard to exactly time when the storms are going to develop and then start taking off. So plus or minus 1 to 2, particularly on the front end of that. But I-85 corridor, Atlanta Metro, down to Columbus, LaGrange, up towards the North Georgia mountains, LG over to Blairsville. You all are in that 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. window with the storms moving in. We could see some isolated stuff move in as early as 10. But the primary window seems to be midnight 1 when it's lined up on the Metro. And again, I'll get into the individual timing. And then for the areas from, say, Athens to Macon to Maracus, 2 a.m. and after, through 8 a.m. or so, all the way down to our southeast, say Swainsboro, Lyons, up towards Augusta. You guys are early in the morning tomorrow morning. One thing that is available to you if you want to take a look, the Storm Prediction Center uses their outlook and the probabilities that I go through and the different probabilities and breaks it down by city based on the risk and shows a graphic. The two graphics you see on the screen here, one for Dalton and one for Atlanta, are just two examples. That link there is where you can find your individual location, and it helps you break down the timing. So, for example, the Dalton graphic you're looking at, they are under a moderate risk, and that moderate risk generally runs from about 8:30 until about 2:30 in the morning. And so that's obviously when the greatest peak window for severe weather, and that's what we're trying to time with some of this stuff. And then you can see the individual risks and when those peak probabilities occur for your location. So that's what those graphics try to help describe for your location. You can see Atlanta here. And in the top right corner of that, you can see the individual categorical risk. So the tornado and the wind for Atlanta is a 3. Dalton, your wind is a 4. Your tornado is a 3, would be a level 3. So it kind of breaks it down a little bit more if you want to get into the granular details of it. Just letting you know those graphics are there and available. Pick out your closest city at the link that's on the screen, and they are available for every single office. So if you're not in our office, you can change the 3 letters at the end to whatever office serves your city, and you can find your graphic. So let's talk about the individual hazards. Let's start with the tornado risk, which is the highest. We are looking at the hatched area. We've talked about this hatched area in the past. It typically coincides with an enhanced risk area. And so you see the area that's hatched, that is where the possibility of strong, that would be EF2 or greater long track tornadoes are possible. You also see it on the Storm Prediction Center legend that's down on the bottom right. Down here, there's your legend with your actual percentage probabilities. Those percentage probabilities, Dave covered them a little bit yesterday, but the way you look at those and the way you sort of verbalize those is on any given day, this time of year, your risk is generally 0.4% of seeing a tornado within 25 miles of your location. So when you're seeing it 10% to 15%, you're looking at a 25 to 50 times higher than average probability for seeing a tornado today over any given normal day on March 15th. So that's how you read those probabilities. And then you can see back to the west in Alabama, those probabilities jump up to about 30%, 30 to 45% across Alabama, and that would be in the high risk. And that's how the Storm Prediction Center actually breaks down the risks themselves. But the 15% probability does coincide with that moderate risk. And so obviously anything coming out of Alabama is going to have a greater risk because we're just coming off the high risk. And so one of the concerning things for us is the proximity to the high risk that we have and the fact that we are just downstream of the risk itself. We're not on the west side, we're actually on the east side. So whatever's coming through it, we'll have to get here. And obviously that bodes problematic for us here in Georgia. So that's the tornado risk. Let me jump to the next slide, which I think is the wind. And this is where the changes occurred for you in the northwest corner. They did introduce a 45 to 60% probability of a severe wind. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute, but given the strength of the winds off the surface that'll be moving into the region late tonight, add in the elevation and the proximity you have to the higher winds off the surface, it's not going to take much to mix down those 60 to 80 mile an hour winds that are blowing off the surface. So the probability of severe wind obviously is in the hatched, and that would be for gusts over 74 miles an hour. Not out of the question with any of the storms. This wouldn't be anything not associated with like clear and sunny today, this afternoon. This would be with the storms themselves. Wind gusts potentially up to or greater than 74. So that risk obviously increases this evening and through the storms in the early morning tomorrow morning. I do want to mention that from a WIA standpoint, if we see severe thunderstorms, if we don't see a tornadic storm, but we do see a severe thunderstorm warning, with winds of 80 miles an hour. I do want to throw this out there because it's fairly new. And we issue a severe thunderstorm warning with winds of 80 miles an hour. It will WIA on your phone. We do not WIA alert severe thunderstorm warnings for 60 and 70. Those are the normal thunderstorm warnings. But if there is a severe thunderstorm warning where there is 80 mile an hour winds or greater expected or potential, it will WIA your phone just like a tornado warning. So just so you know that that's out there and a possibility that we may have tonight. Parlaying this forward into tomorrow morning, the tail end of the line will be across that southeast, Sandersville to Dublin tomorrow morning. And so the risk does shift to you early tomorrow morning. The Storm Prediction Center outlooks cut off at 7 a.m. in the morning, or 8 a.m. in the morning, 7 a.m. in the morning. So at 7 a.m., your risk is with that line moving forward. So the day 2 outlook covers basically the tail end of that line in the morning hours tomorrow morning. So your risk, same as us to the west, albeit a little bit reduced because we're starting to run out of instability, and some of the higher instability factors are starting to lift out by tomorrow morning, but it is non-zero for you in the southeast, and you'll have the remnant line as it's moving in the morning. So let's get into the individual timing and what this may look like on radar as it's approaching you later today. So let's start on the far north, the northwest, the top left corner of your screen. 8 p.m. tonight. This is just one model showing some of the storms moving into the northwest region. We see the line, could be a line, could be a lot of broken supercells or individual storms to the west. We still don't know how it's going to take shape through the day. It's starting to look like it'll be a line with storms that pop up out in front of it. But nonetheless, it'll be marching into Alabama about that time, with storms starting to develop maybe in the northwest corner of the state, somewhere between 6, 7, 8 o'clock and moving in. So 8 o'clock for you continues through the 10 o'clock time frame in the middle graphic. That's 10 p.m. You can see the line is now approaching the Birmingham region in central Alabama. And then we move to the bottom right graphic. That's 11 p.m. Still storms continuing to fire in the far northwest. So you guys are under the gun a little bit earlier from that 8 to 11 window, where we could see some of these become severe. And as I'll show a little bit later, the one thing that is an inhibiting factor to the storms early in the evening would be that instability is a little bit lower. It looks like the main surge in instability and moisture comes just ahead of the line as it's moving in late tonight. And I'll show that graphically here in a minute. But nonetheless, the concern for us is very high because the wind shear is going to be excessive with any of these storms up here. So we do have some instability, but the wind shear is pretty high. So obviously these are going to be of concern for us in the early evening hours tonight for you in the northwest, ahead of the main line itself. Let's move forward from 11 p.m. to 12 through 3 a.m. And I'm going to, what you'll notice here is I'm shifting from the Alabama-centric graphic on the top left to a Georgia-centric graphic in the middle in the top right. But the line itself should be approaching the Georgia state line somewhere in the 11 to 12, maybe time frame. And then what we see by 1 a.m. is storms approaching the I-85 corridor, the graphic in the middle. And so we'll see them popping up. Again, we don't know whether these will be supercells or whether they'll be just feeder cells into the main line, and that the tornadic portion of the line itself would be just confined to the line. We'll have to see how it evolves through the evening, but that's generally what we're thinking on the time frame. And then by 3 a.m., so in that 1 to 3, the line traverses from the state line to the metro, maybe just east of the metro, down through Columbus, approaching Macon, but from the North Georgia mountains down through the metro, and then points south and east. So again, plus or minus an hour or two, that's roughly what we're looking at. And we'll be watching the line itself and then storms ahead of the line that are merging into the line itself, because again, it will be an unstable air mass in front of it, and we're dealing with a lot of wind shear in the low levels, which are conducive to what we see with tornadic storms that can develop quickly overnight tonight. All right, fast forward. Let's start at 4 a.m. You can see the line has now cleared Metro and is now roughly from Athens to Macon to Americus. Becomes a little more broken. This model run is trying to suggest that maybe it's trying to break up a little bit, and we're seeing more cellular storms as it's getting east. We'll see how that develops. But one thing is for certain, that the risk will diminish behind the line once it passes through for any of your locations through the night. By 5 to 6 a.m., we're getting into the I-16 corridor with cells developing along any remnant of the line and just ahead of it. And then by 8 a.m., we're getting into the far southeastern counties with storms and cells. So again, this particular model is trying to break up the line. Some of them are doing it, some are not. So this is just one example of what it may look like for you. That top right graphic, some of you are seeing there's a storm that's developing up near Chattanooga in the northwest. It is possible that we could get some storms to develop early in the morning through the late morning hours as the main upper level energy starts to swing through. We're not expecting much in the way of severe with those. There could be a little bit of hail, but a lot of the instability and things have worked east with the line itself. So again, we may see something on the backside, but don't expect anything to be severe with any of that. So just pointing that out. So now I want to talk about the strong winds. I'm going to let this loop through. And what I want you to particularly pick out is back over Mississippi and Alabama, you'll notice a lot more red in color. This corresponds to the winds at 1,000 to 3,500 feet off the ground. And this is why the damaging wind threat, we think, is much higher with this as it's moving in. What you'll notice is that the strong winds off the surface actually increase in size and space as it moves closer to Georgia from the time it starts over Mississippi and Alabama and then into Georgia. So those winds correspond to greater than 70 knots or 70 miles an hour to 80 plus miles an hour across a good portion of northern Georgia off the surface. And so it's only going to take those storms getting a hold of some of those winds and bringing them down to the surface over any portion of the area as that line moves in to cause significant and widespread wind damage. So that's why we think the wind threat is not to be discounted or thought of any less than the tornado risk itself, because we have all of these really strong winds off the surface. So again, any of these storms that mix this stuff down would be a potential problem. One thing to note too is the highest winds showing up in the models, and we see this in all of them, is up against the mountains. So those higher elevations, it's going to be really windy tonight up there. And so we may see significant tree blowdown across the far north with these stronger winds that don't have to travel as far down to the surface to mix down. So keep that in mind if you're up in the far north. And that's, again, why the Storm Prediction Center expanded that high wind threat further east on the moderate risk. The other part of this is the energy itself. So this is the atmospheric instability, a measure of it, one way to look at it. And this is starting around 6 p.m. tonight through 4 a.m. And the one thing I want you to pick out here as this thing loops is the colors in green are some of the higher instability values. And you can see that it travels with the line. If you assume this clear spot that works in toward the end, behind it is the actual line itself. Just out ahead of it, we see a surge in that instability within the line. So what that does is that allows those storms coming in from Alabama to maintain themselves as they're moving in, because it's pulling in instability ahead of the line. So that gives us a little bit more confidence that the storms are going to maintain their intensity as they move into Georgia. Maybe not as intense as they were further west, but at least maintain some of the intensity as they're moving in. So that's, again, what the Storm Prediction Center was looking at yesterday when they pushed the moderate risk into our region, was the fact that this instability stays with the line as it moves in, even though it's 1, 2, 3 in the morning. All right. Switch gears over to the flood risk and the rainfall. Um, the rainfall amounts that we're expecting are on the left, and you can see the heaviest rainfall 2 to 3, some isolated 3 to 4s in the far northwest. This is today through tomorrow morning through the period of the event. Some of the mountains we're going to have to watch with those strong winds surging in from the north. There may be some in the higher elevations. We may see some heavier rainfall that we may, in isolated amounts that we may have to pay attention to, given the amount of flow that's flowing northward into that region. But generally speaking, outside of the elevation in the far northwest, it's 1 to 1.5. And the one thing you'll notice is in the graphic on the left-hand side are some swaths of 1 to 1.5 and then some lower amounts. I wouldn't get too caught up in your exact location here because this is the models trying to pick out where it thinks some of the heavier showers or storms are going to track and dump some heavier rainfall. That's all that's insinuating, is that there's going to be streaks where the stronger storms move across, where you see bump ups of 1 to 1.5, whereas everyone else around you may only get 0.5 to 1. So that's all that's trying to suggest. We aren't expecting to expand the flood watch. That is the graphic on the right. It is generally encompassing those areas where we're looking at roughly the probability of 2 inches or greater rainfall up in the far north Georgia. So that doesn't mean we won't see some isolated, very quick response flooding with the line as it moves in. But generally speaking, we're not expecting anything widespread to cause a widespread flood event outside of what could happen up there in the far north. All right, the last thing we'll talk about is the wind out ahead of the system. This would be non-thunderstorm wind starting this afternoon through tomorrow. And we are expecting the winds to pick up as the storms to the west pick up in intensity and we start to see the upper level support start to move in. Max wind gusts today, this afternoon, 30 to 40 across a good chunk of the area, except the far eastern part of our area, 20 to 30. The mountains could be gusting 40 to 50 this afternoon. Overnight tonight, ahead of and just ahead of the line, 30 to 40 widespread across the area. There are pockets where we could see some mixing of 40 to 50, especially just ahead of the line as storms approach. We could see some gusts out of the south and southeast, 40 to 50. So it is going to be pretty breezy with all of the wind flowing into the storms that are approaching. And then on the backside tomorrow, we are expecting winds to die down a little bit, significantly amount tomorrow, during the day tomorrow, 10 to 20 across the west, 20 to 30 in the southeast. And this would be max wind gusts during the day tomorrow. So wrapping this up, again, reiterating, severe threat today, as early as this evening across the northwest, with the primary time window 8 p.m. through 10 a.m. Could see storms moving into the northwest a little bit earlier, 1 or 2 hours earlier. We'll have to watch that closely through the day. And again, all hazards are on the table. Talked about that quite a bit here through the briefing. Help us spread the word. Obviously, today is the day to prepare and have a plan. Use your social media outlets to push out before people go to bed. Make sure they have a plan. If they are in a warning, know where they're going to go within their house or wherever they're located. We've got some graphics. We put out some on social media that you can use. But the main thing is, if you're going to bed, have multiple ways to receive a warning or some way to wake you up if you are asleep in a tornado warning. WIA is great. Make sure your phone's on and charged. Weather radio. There's other mobile apps out there that you can download. Obviously, the tornado sirens, for those of you in those communities that have them, you'll have that. If your TV's on, obviously you can watch any of the local broadcasts, which I'm fairly certain they'll be going wall to wall tonight as things are evolving. And that will do it on our briefing. This is our last official briefing. We will be in Slack later as things start to unfold. Feel free to reach out to us, contact us in Slack. We are staffing up pretty heavily this evening and through the overnight. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us in there.